The stage lights flared. The band played its upbeat tune, and Graham Norton leaned back in his signature red chair with his familiar grin. It was another big night on his iconic show, and the audience was buzzing. Cameras panned across the excited crowd before settling on Graham, who announced the next guest with a flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle." The crowd clapped loudly, polite, enthusiastic, though not the thunderous standing ovation Meghan seemed to expect. She emerged from the wings with a smile fixed tightly in place, wearing a tailored dress designed to command attention. Her stride was confident, almost regal, and she waved as though she were entering a palace gala rather than a late-night talk show. She took Graham's hand with a carefully measured shake, then turned to the audience with a small nod, waiting just a fraction too long for the applause to rise higher. When it didn't, she adjusted her smile and sat, crossing her legs slowly, deliberately, as though settling onto a throne rather than a chair. Graham gave his usual warm welcome. "It's wonderful to have you here, Meghan. Please, relax, enjoy yourself. We promise. No coronations, no crowns, just conversation." The audience laughed. Meghan smiled faintly, but her eyes flickered. "Well," she said smoothly, "it's always nice to be treated with a little dignity, especially considering my background." The word background hung heavy in the air. Graham's grin twitched, but he let it slide. For now, the interview began in familiar territory. Graham asked about Meghan's current projects, a documentary in development, a new lifestyle venture. She answered at length, her tone polished, her sentences carefully rehearsed. But underneath her words was a subtle edge, a quiet expectation that her presence itself was a privilege for the show. "You know," she said at one point, shifting in her chair, "it's refreshing to sit here and not be surrounded by people who forget who I am." The audience gave a nervous chuckle. Graham raised an eyebrow, tilting his head. "Oh, I don't think anyone here has forgotten," he said lightly. Although, in fairness, they came for jokes as much as for royalty. The crowd laughed harder, but Meghan didn't. She forced a small laugh, then leaned forward. "Of course, but I do think it's important to acknowledge certain courtesies. After all, not every guest has had the honor of being part of the royal family." The air tightened. The audience shifted in their seats, the laughter trailing off into silence. Graham's smile thinned. "Courtesies?" he repeated, his tone still light, but edged with curiosity. "You mean the tea service? The velvet cushions? I'm afraid we're fresh out of thrones backstage." The audience roared with laughter, clapping. Meghan's smile stiffened. She adjusted the hem of her dress, her eyes flashing briefly before she smoothed her expression. "Well," she replied coolly, "not thrones, obviously, but a certain level of respect, recognition. After everything I've been through, it's only fair to expect a little extra consideration." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some clapped nervously, others shifted uncomfortably. Graham leaned back in his chair, tapping his cue cards lightly against his knee, his grin now sharper, more deliberate. "Extra consideration," he said slowly. "Well, we do offer water, and if you're very lucky, maybe even sparkling water." The audience exploded with laughter. Meghan didn't. Her smile faltered again, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She crossed her legs again, her posture tightening, her voice calm but defensive. "You know, Graham, it's easy to make jokes, but when you've lived under constant scrutiny, when you've carried titles, responsibilities, you begin to understand the importance of respect." The room went quiet again, the laughter fading. The tension had thickened. Graham studied her carefully, his grin still there but his eyes sharper now. "Oh, I don't doubt you understand titles," he said with a glint. "But you're on the Graham Norton show now, and here everyone's equal until the punchlines start flying." The crowd erupted once more, clapping, cheering, whistling. Meghan forced another laugh, but her hands tightened around the armrests of her chair. The build-up was over. The tension was real. Meghan had expected deference. Graham had given her banter. And the audience knew it. This wasn't going to end politely. The polite applause had long faded. The audience sat forward in their seats, eyes darting between Graham's mischievous grin and Meghan's increasingly tight smile. What had started as harmless banter was no longer harmless. It had turned into something raw, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Meghan leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her tone smooth but edged with steel. "I suppose it's easy for you to laugh, Graham. But you haven't lived in my shoes. You haven't carried the weight of constant headlines, constant criticism, constant judgment. It takes strength to carry a title, and I've done it with grace." The words hung in the air. A few audience members clapped politely, but the rest of the room was dead silent. The co-stars on the couch shifted uneasily, one biting their lip, another lowering their eyes. Graham sat still, his smile fixed, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Grace?" he repeated softly, then louder. "Well, if that's your idea of grace, I'd hate to see your idea of entitlement." The audience erupted. Laughter, applause, whistles bouncing off the rafters. Meghan blinked, her smile flickering into something tighter, her jaw clenching just enough to be caught on camera. She forced a laugh, leaning back. "That's a very clever line, but it doesn't change the fact that I've had to endure things you couldn't possibly imagine." Graham leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, his grin sharpening. "Oh, Meghan, I think we can all imagine. In fact, we've had quite a detailed tour of your struggles. Netflix, Oprah, spare interviews, podcasts. You've been very thorough." The audience roared again, the laughter rolling like thunder. Meghan's smile froze, her hands gripping the armrests. "Well," she said stiffly, "it's easy to judge from the outside. People forget I'm still a human being. I deserve to be treated with dignity, whether I'm here or anywhere else." Graham's grin widened. "Of course you do, but dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you command. And right now you're losing the command." The crowd gasped, then erupted once more. Cheers, whistles, claps, the noise deafening. Meghan's face flushed, her smile trembling. She adjusted her dress again, shifting in her seat, searching for composure. The confrontation was no longer subtle. It was live, raw, brutal, and Graham was winning. The studio was electric. The audience's laughter had grown bolder, louder, sharper, their loyalty shifting firmly toward Graham. Meghan, sensing it, straightened her posture, her voice rising. "I came here to talk about my work," she snapped, her polished tone cracking under the weight of frustration. "Not to be mocked, not to be ridiculed." The audience quieted slightly, some murmuring. Graham leaned back, spreading his hands innocently. "Mocked? Ridiculed? Meghan, this is a comedy talk show. If you wanted silence and nods, you might have chosen the wrong couch." The audience erupted again, clapping and cheering. Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. "This isn't about comedy. This is about respect, and I don't think it's too much to expect that I'm treated properly." Graham's grin sharpened. "Properly? Oh, forgive me, Duchess. Do you mean bowing and curtsying every time we ask a question? Because if that's what you're waiting for, you'll be waiting a very long time." The studio exploded. People howled, clapped, some stood from their seats, stomping in approval. Meghan turned red, her smile now completely gone. Her voice rose, firmer now, sharper. "You think this is funny, Graham? You think belittling me in front of millions is entertainment?" Graham leaned forward, his voice steady, cutting. "No, Meghan. What's funny is that you came here asking for royal treatment. On a show that makes fun of everyone, equally. You wanted a throne. What you got was a chair. And that seems to be the real problem." The eruption was volcanic. The audience screamed, clapped, whistled, their laughter shaking the set. Some co-stars on the couch covered their mouths in shock. Others couldn't stop chuckling nervously. Meghan sat frozen, her hands trembling on her lap. She tried one last time, her voice cracking with anger. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be humiliated like this." Graham delivered the line that silenced the entire room. "No, Meghan, you don't deserve humiliation, but you certainly earned it." The audience gasped so loudly it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. Then, as if on cue, the cheers, claps, and whistles erupted again. Louder, bolder, unstoppable. The camera zoomed in on Meghan's face. Flushed, her eyes flashing with fury, her lips pressed tight. And then it happened. Meghan ripped off her microphone, her hands shaking, and stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the stage floor. The audience gasped in unison, the eruption of noise now deafening. Without another word, Meghan turned and stormed off the stage, her heels clicking furiously against the wood, disappearing behind the curtains. The audience screamed, half in shock, half in approval. Graham sat back, smirking, his cue cards forgotten on the table. He raised his eyebrows at the crowd. "Well," he said dryly, "I suppose you won't be sending me a Christmas card." The crowd howled, the laughter and clapping rattling the rafters. The escalation had peaked. Meghan Markle had stormed off. and Graham Norton had just delivered one of the most unforgettable takedowns in talk show history. The sound of Meghan's heels clattering off stage still echoed when Graham leaned back, smirking at the stunned audience. The crowd was still in uproar, half cheering wildly, half booing, some gasping as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. A chant started in one corner, "Graham! Graham! Graham!" but was drowned out by a wave of whistles and claps. The cameras cut back to Graham, who raised his eyebrows and quipped, "Well, that's one way to exit. Shame. We were just getting to the good part." The audience howled, laughter rolling like thunder. But the tension wasn't finished, because within seconds, Meghan reappeared at the edge of the curtain, her microphone still in her hand, her face flushed red. She stormed back onto the stage, pointing toward Graham. "You think this is funny?" she shouted, her voice cracking over the noise. "You think mocking me in front of millions makes you clever? This is disrespect. This is bullying!" The audience gasped again. Some booed, others cheered louder. The other guests on the couch froze, their eyes darting nervously between Graham and Meghan. Graham, unbothered, leaned forward, his grin sharper than ever. "Bullying? No, Meghan. This is a talk show. We talk, we laugh, we tease. The only thing royal here is the size of your ego." The studio exploded. Claps, whistles, screams so loud the cameramen's mics peaked. Meghan's mouth dropped open in shock, her face twisting with fury. She tried to speak again, but the roar of the crowd drowned her out completely. Joyous laughter and cheers filled the room as Graham turned to the audience, shrugging. "Honestly, I was going to offer her sparkling water. Now I'm not so sure she could handle the bubbles." The eruption was volcanic. Some fans stood from their seats, cheering so hard the rafters shook. Meghan's chest heaved, her eyes wild, her microphone trembling in her grip. "You don't get to do this to me," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You don't get to humiliate me like this. I'm not just another guest. I'm a duchess." The word duchess hung in the air, sharp and bitter. The crowd erupted again, some booing loudly, others cackling in disbelief. Graham's smile thinned into something colder now. He leaned forward, his voice low but amplified perfectly by the mic. "Not here, you're not. Here, you're just Meghan. And right now, you're making a spectacle of yourself." The silence that followed was crushing. Then, as if on cue, the audience burst into cheers and applause, deafening, relentless. Meghan's face crumpled, her fury boiling over. She tore the microphone off again, throwing it onto the chair and screamed, "This show is beneath me!" And with that, she turned once more, storming toward the wings. This time, she didn't come back. The breaking point had come, and she had shattered. The studio was chaos. The audience screamed, half on their feet cheering, the other half booing with equal ferocity. The band sat frozen, their instruments untouched, waiting for a signal from the producers. The other guests shifted uncomfortably on the couch, some covering their mouths, others whispering nervously. Graham, however, remained calm. He straightened his cards, sipped his water, and leaned back with a smirk as the noise swirled around him. "Well," he said dryly, "that went well. We should invite her back next week." The audience erupted again, clapping, howling, whistling. Graham raised his hands mock seriously. "Don't worry, folks. I'll have the velvet cushions ready. Maybe even a throne." The laughter shook the rafters. Meanwhile, Meghan's shadow was visible briefly behind the curtain, her team rushing to her side, gesturing wildly as cameras swung to catch glimpses. Security guards moved into position, making sure the exit route was clear. The audience started chanting again, louder now. "Graham! Graham! Graham!" The chant rattled the set. The crowd unified in their wild support for the host. Graham shrugged at the cameras, his smirk unwavering. Well, there you have it. The first guest in history to storm off twice in 10 minutes. Quite the record. The crowd howled with laughter, clapping so loudly it shook the floor. Graham leaned forward once more, delivering his final cutting remark. "You know, the funny thing about respect is you don't get it by demanding it. You earn it. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we've all seen the difference." The eruption was total. The audience screamed, cheered, stomped, their approval so loud it drowned out everything else. And then, the cameras cut. No outro music. No smooth transition. Just a sharp, abrupt blackout. The last image frozen in viewers' minds. Meghan Markle storming off Graham Norton's stage in fury, while Graham sat cool, calm, and smiling, his wit having dismantled her demand for royal treatment in front of millions.